Hello and welcome to Unprofessional Engineering. My name is James.
And you got Luke.
Luke, today we're tackling the engineering behind the Olympics, or more specifically, the Summer Olympics, right?
Yeah, and I think this one is a little close to my heart because this year, the Summer Olympics were canceled because of the global pandemic, which I think is a big bummer, especially for those athletes like me who have trained their entire lives to prepare for the Olympics, and then to just have them delayed is like, it's really difficult for me.
Imagine being one of those crazy good Olympic athletes. I mean that you are, of course, but
yes.
Like, this is what your whole life has been about, and you only have a window this big to make it happen.
Yeah, I mean, there's very few people who do like multiple Olympics. Like,
right.
You know, like Michael Phelps is kind of like the phenom. You know, he's done like 3 or 4 of them, but most people it's like 1, maybe 2 max.
Right.
So if you miss one, or like you break your ankle next week or right before the next one, yes, I do feel terrible for all of those athletes that have literally trained. Fun story, though. I saw this thing that Conan O'Brien did where he interviewed a gymnast or supposed gymnast right after it canceled, and the guy weighed like 400 pounds. And he's like, what happened? He's like, well, they got canceled. I stopped training, started eating pizzas and ice cream a lot. And he's like, well, when did you start doing it? He's like, oh, about a week ago. It was a pretty good bit. So
I love it. All right, so we each picked a few sports that we thought would be interesting for the engineering behind the Olympics. And so the first one that I took a look at was track. And I just kind of say track in general. So running around in a circle, which just sounds like the worst to me. I don't like to run, and I don't like to run in a circle especially. So there's actually a crazy amount of math that goes along with track, if you think about it. Now, if we're talking about like the 100-meter, is it a dash or a run, or 100 meters that people run?
yeah.
Not really that much math. You're just running in a straight line, and the track has a nice straight stretch that you can all run on. It doesn't matter where you're lined up on the track. You just all run straight, and that's that. But once you get into something a little bit longer, things get a little bit trickier because the track's a big oval, right? And so now you have 9 different lanes that people are running on.
Is that what it is, 9?
It's 9. So apparently the IAFF, which is apparently the people that make these decisions, have decided that 9 lanes is what we have to run on. And apparently it's because after you get outside of the 9th lane, if you added a 10, 11, 12, the advantage for being on the outside is just too significant. So, at least in their opinion. It seems kind of arbitrary to me. But anyways, track is all about the math once you start running around in that oval. And so why is it all about that? Well, because the further out you get, of course, the distance is greater, right? So that's that's why when you see someone running basically any event that's not like one of the short ones, they have like a staggered start. And the person in the first lane, like the inside-most lane, is at what we'll call the start line. And then the second lane is out a little bit further. The third's out a little bit further than that. And so they have to use math to figure all of this out as to where everybody should be located at. And so if you look at the general runway, each track's going to have like a 100-meter straight stretch, which actually kind of protrudes into one of the semicircle parts of the track. But that's where they're going to do the 100-meter stretch of it. And then they have a semicircle that has a radius of 36.5 meters going around. Then another straight stretch, which is about, like, I think a little over 84 meters. And then another one of those semicircles. So if you think about it, we know that, I guess it's 400 meters around that track if you're running. That's the general statement. But depending what lane you're on, that's not necessarily the case. So each lane is a little bit wider. The radius of lane 2, for instance, is, instead of the 36.5 that I mentioned, which is the radius for lane 1, it's actually 36.5 plus 1.22 meters, or 37.72 meters. So lane 2's a little bit bigger than lane 1, and then vice versa for, not vice versa, but 3's bigger than 2, which is 4 is bigger than 3, and so on. So if you keep figuring out the math, you can figure out the advantage that the runners have depending on where they're standing. And then if you look at the runners that are in the track, it also depends how close to the edge of the track they're running. So if you're running directly in the center, which I just always assumed everyone is, you're running kind of like the calculated amount. But if you're really good, you're able to move over to your left a little bit so that you're close to the edge. And so you're cutting off just a little bit of the track each time that you're running around, but it ends up being a fairly significant amount of time. And I saw an example on there about how much this significant amount of time is. Basically, you are able to change your results by 0.2%. So you're running 0.2% less as you're snuggling over there. So,
and if you think of like the times that are between first place and second place and third place, that's definitely an advantage to kind of sneak over to the left a little bit.
That's exactly right. So if you look at Usain Bolt, who's almost as fast as you, but just a little bit slower, a 2% change in his time is about 4/100ths of a second. Now keep in mind that he's a short distance runner, and that's still 4/100ths of a second. The world record has changed over less time than that, multiple times. So being able to hug that line and not, of course, if you cross it, you're disqualified, but hugging that line actually does give you a significant advantage. And the same thing can be said for the different lanes that you're running, and then the different plans on some of the things you're allowed to cut back inside. So, of course, if you're on the outside, you want to get back onto the inside to have that smaller track. There's tons of great math that goes along with this, figuring out the different distances that everyone's going to be running and how long the different circles of the various lanes are. But I'll let people go Google that for themselves because I know we have a lot of events to talk about.
Gotcha.
All right. So what's your first event, Luke?
So my first one, it's actually multiple events, but they're all kind of put into to one category, and I'll go through them quickly. This is track cycling.
Okay.
And this is, first of all, where they do it, it's called a velodrome. So it's the banked sides. It's called a velodrome. It's an indoor cycling arena.
Okay.
And it has banked sides, so it's not a flat track. So they ride on a bank the whole time. And fun fact about track cycling, they have no brakes and no gears on their bikes.
What?
I never knew that. I just assumed that they had. I knew they didn't have gears. I knew they were single speed bikes, but I had no idea they had no brakes.
Now, when it's done, what do? They just kind of glide around until they slow and
they just kind of decelerate and So
interesting.
Fun fact. So there are basically, what is it? 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 5 different track events. Track cycling events have been organized in all editions of the Summer Games since 1896. The first one is called Team Pursuit. So imagine if you get 4 riders, you're all on one team, and then there's 4 riders on the opposite side of the velodrome, and you start at the same time. And basically, you take turns leading on the lap. So if me and you are on a team, and we have Troy and Jim, so I will be in the lead for the first lap.
Yeah.
After that lap, I peel off and I move to the back, and then you go into first place.
Okay.
And then after that, and you keep on taking turns for each lap. And what you're doing is the wind resistance in the front person leading that race is 30% more, and it gets from the person directly behind him, and it gets third. And
it like compounds as the...
Exactly. So basically you're drafting. If you ever heard of drafting in NASCAR, you are essentially drafting off of your teammate, and what you're doing is for one lap, you're going as hard as you can, and then you kind of rest in the back. So you do this for 16 laps, you take turns, and whatever team wins, there's 2 teams doing this at one time, whoever crosses after 16 laps wins the race. That's Team Pursuit.
Hold on, real quick. Why do you keep switching then? So that you don't get worn out? Like it saves you energy?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, okay.
So basically, you go all out for basically 4 laps per person.
So you're like sprinting, but
Yeah,
Okay.
but it's not like 4 laps consecutive. It's like I do 1 lap and then I get a 3-lap break, and then 1 lap and then 3-lap break.
cool.
The next one is called an omnium. I think I'm pronouncing it right.
Oh,
this
yeah.
is the aggregate of 4 different races. So it's a tempo race, a scratch race, an elimination, and a points race. I'm not going to go into the details on that one. It's just you take all those scores from those 4 different races, and that equals the one. The coolest one, I thought, is what they call the sprint race. This is where there's just 2 people, and they have a standing start, and it's head-to-head, and it's crazy because you would think you would just go all out, right? You think that's just what you would do. But what they do, and I've seen this, and I never knew why they did it, they'll just kind of go super slow and pedal really slow, and what you're trying to do is to get your opponent to break and try to take first place, and then you draft off of them, and then at the very end, hopefully you have enough energy to overtake them. So there's a ton of strategy whenever you're doing sprint races. There's also a team sprint, so same kind of thing as a single sprint, but there's actually multiple people in the sprint. And then the coolest one is called a Kirin. Similar to the Japanese beer. This was invented in Japan.
Okay.
And they take this motorized motorcycle. It's a bike with an engine called a Duri, and they get it up to 50 kilometers per hour with everybody kind of jockeying for position. So there'll be 20
Dangerous.
people in line. Very dangerous. And what happens is as soon as it gets up to 50 kilometers per hour, the bike peels off and everybody goes bananas and starts jockeying for position. And again, it's all strategy. Do you want to be in the back and you're catching a good draft, and then you can move up to the front during the last lap? So tons and tons of strategy, lots of aerodynamics and thinking about where you are in the pack. It's also one of the most dangerous because there's lots of people, lots of crashes. So that is probably, I think, one of the most underrated sports that I've seen in the Summer Olympics is cycling. It's so, like, when they crash, they're just like spectacular crashes, and it gets very it gets very little television time in the Summer Olympics unless you're like staying up till like 2 a.m. on MSNBC watching it. But prime time.
Are you
Summer
one of
Olympic
those people?
watching.
Do you stay up late and watch it?
I do. I really get into the Summer Olympics.
Okay.
I enjoy them quite a bit.
Is horse racing an Olympic event?
No, it's not. That's an event that you gamble on, James.
Well, that's why I'm familiar with it. Okay, so before we get into that any further, maybe it's time we take a break for a word from our sponsor.
I have to assume it's the International Olympic Committee?
I mean, they don't have anything else to spend their money on right now, so... No, we do not have a sponsor this week. I know, very sad. But we do have a couple of shout-outs, which makes me feel good.
Let's hear them.
So Jacob B. just wanted to thank you guys for putting on a fun show. He says he doesn't get to listen as often as he would like, but he caught the SR-71 episode and loved it, which everybody seems to really like that one, so that's super cool. And he tells us keep up the good work from Provo, Utah, which I've actually been to. And then there's Tyrese S. who wrote in. This one's super interesting. He's a social sciences major, he graduated, that's looking to get a master's in engineering, which is very unusual as far as I'm concerned. I've never heard of someone doing such a thing, but that's kind of interesting. And he'd like an episode on kind of like different ways that you could go about getting that engineering degree as opposed to the traditional 4-year bachelor degree, kind of like the path that he took. So I thought that was kind of cool. So if any of you have great episode ideas like these other folks have, or you just want to tell us you love the show, or you hate the show, or whatever you want to say, why don't you email us at unprofessionalengineering@gmail.com.
And if you want any more stickers or shout-outs or anything like that, make sure you subscribe, make sure you like, make sure you share all over the social medias. We would appreciate it.
Absolutely, we would appreciate it, Luke. All right, so moving on to the next event. The next one that I looked at is a really interesting one to me. It is the pole vault. And so the pole vault is just what it sounds like. The person has a big pole, and they vault over another pole. And that's it. Okay. Luke, what was your next? No, I'm kidding. So kind of interesting history about this thing. The pole vault was first used to get over canals and marshes. And it was really just a matter of maximizing your horizontal distance. So, these things that you didn't want to try and wade through, you would use a pole to shoot yourself across them. So in the mid 1800s, some guy decided that maybe he could use these poles for other things. And the modern pole vault was then, after it was played around with as a sport in the mid and late 1800s, it became a competition in Germany, of all places, in 1950. The original poles were like really stiff, kind of like they would be if you were trying to shoot yourself over one of those canals, like almost like a tree branch. They were very stiff, but over time, of course, they've become far more flexible. And if any of you have ever watched it during the Olympics or whatever, you see the people like jab that sucker into the ground and really like kind of torque it down, right? And bend that thing to kind of fling themselves up over the pole. So I'm looking at the math behind this. Kind of interesting if you're into that sort of thing, which if you're listening to us, you probably are. And when I'm looking at this, I was just assuming there's two positions. There's person on the ground running as fast as they can, building up speed, and there's person at the top of the pole, right? Those are the two positions that we have to worry about. Notice that I'm skipping the pole bends part of this equation because I'm not that good at math. So if I assume that when the pole's bending and all of that's going on, that there's no loss of energy during this time, which of course that's not really how it is, but it's kind of close, we're allowed to make these assumptions. So what does matter is your position when you're running with it, with your kinetic energy, and then the position at the top of the pole when you're sitting up there so that there's no kinetic energy left. So you look at the equation, the delta K, which is change in kinetic energy, plus delta U of G and delta U of S. So we're looking at the different positions that you're at. We can use all of that to figure out all of our energy and momentum that's moving forward. Fortunately for us, a few of these things factor out to zero. So really we end up getting like kinetic energy equals UG2. So we use our favorite equation, 1/2 mv squared equals mgh. So this is something that if you're familiar with engineering, you probably looked at a lot in your physics classes. The m's cancel out conveniently, and so we end up looking at basically velocity equals the square root of 2gh. So g being gravity and h is your height. So all you need to do is solve for velocity. So to basically set the world record at this point, it's saying your velocity is 9.9 meters per second, which is about 22 miles per hour. So in my equation, by solving it so accurately, to set the world record, you have to be moving 22 miles per hour with this giant pole in your hand and launch yourself over the pole. So you're moving seriously wrong. But the good thing to know about this is that the calculation I just did is basically completely inaccurate, which I think you would come to expect nothing less from us at that point. So there's certain things missing from this, and that's two things really. The vaulter can add extra energy into the system in different ways. So the vaulter doesn't just run and fling himself over and jump, right? The person actually, like if you were standing still and did this, that would probably be the case. But the person can like contort their body as they're flinging themselves up.
There's a lot of technique that they can do to increase that.
So the technique comes into play, as well as then the bend of that pole that you're running with. So when it was a stiff pole, less of that mattered. But now that it's so flexible, you get that extra energy boost. You're basically cheating energy by flinging yourself up and over. So then if you've also watched it, when the person gets to the top, not only does the pole fling them, but they push themselves off of the top of that pole, giving themselves about another 1/2 meter of height that they're going. And then as they're coming back, they start kind of like contorting themselves around that top pole, because if you hit it and knock it over, of course you don't qualify. So they then arch their backs and bend themselves over. So even though we're using math to try and figure things out, and we figure out that you need to run about 10 meters per second, which sounds like something I'll never be able to do, realistically, you can slow that down just a little bit to maintain control and then use that pole to your advantage, which of course they have strict regulations on, to then fling yourself over. So that's really all I had to say about that.
My whole issue with the pole vault is I've seen it on TV a couple times, but the video that always shows up on YouTube is the one where the person is pole vaulting, and as they go over, the pole falls underneath the bar and it hits them right in the butt. So that's why
hurt.
I would never pole vault.
Is that why you wouldn't? You've
That's
never
the
tried
only
to?
reason. Do you know how bad that would hurt? Like, even if it didn't hit you in the butt, like if it hit you like in the armpit or like in the back, I mean, that's like you're impaling yourself on a giant, carbon fiber pole. It's gotta hurt.
Yeah. I wouldn't do it either, but I'm scared of everything. But I bet even just falling, like even if you don't fall on the pole, you fall on that big cushy thing, I bet it still doesn't feel good.
Yeah, and if you don't, like, what if you land on your head? Even if it's cushiony, if you land wrong?
Yeah, it's dangerous. All right, so before we move on, Luke, I think it's time for this week's Luke's Rant.
Okay, so I got to apologize to a group of people because I'm going to make fun of them.
Ooh, Luke, that's in poor taste.
Well, no. This is like if you happen to be a rhythmic gymnast, a rhythmic gymnast, or
I am.
a trampoliner.
I'm that too.
I think that's what they call themselves. So when James and I initially were picking this episode, we went to the Olympic website. We're looking at all the sports, and we're looking at, like, I can't believe some of these things are considered a sport.
Yeah.
They're like rock climbing. That's another one. Sorry, rock climbers. I know you've spent your entire life, climbing rocks and growing dreadlocks and, wearing patchouli. But I don't know. I get it's an activity. I get you can be good at it. But and you can be amazing at it, like way better than I could ever be. But I just feel like, I don't know. I feel like a sport has to be something that is very measurable, that there's no like interpretation, other like anything that doesn't have interpretation, that isn't measured, like speed, archery, distance. I don't know. And maybe I just don't understand the sports all that well, but I'm apologizing to those kind of three categories of people. So if you're a rock climber, a trampoliner, or a rhythmic gymnast, I just don't know if those are Olympic sports.
Yeah.
And I'm going to throw you under the bus because you were kind of making fun of them too, James.
Well, I was kind of making fun of them, and
Okay,
I do not apologize for it. So take that, trampoliners. I did not know that was an Olympic sport. That blows my mind. The dancey thing, the rhythmic thingy you said, that I guess, but I don't like how subjective it is either. Kind of like figure skating in the winter. Like, I get that some people are doing more spinnies and whatnot, but it's still very subjective. I'm cool with that. All right, moving on, Luke. What's next for you?
Okay, I am going to kind of tag on to your pole vaulting with another one that has energy transfer and kinetic energy and all that, with archery. Archery first appeared in the Olympic Games in 1900. It actually disappeared for 52 years until 1972, when it returned to the games in Munich. The most decorated Olympic archer is, of course, Hubert van Ines from Belgium. Who doesn't have a poster of him on their wall?
Obviously.
Come on. He competed in the 1900 and 1920, and he had 6 golds and 3 silver medals in archery. So here's how the archery breaks down, and this is crazy to me. I watched a couple videos, a couple infographics. So a couple things. First of all, archery is all about potential energy, kinetic energy, and energy transfer. So the potential energy is the bow. Before you even pull the bow, there's all this stored energy, because if you know how a bow works, there's a string between a recurve, and there's energy like waiting there because the limbs of the bow are compressed. So there's this energy just waiting. That potential energy gets increased when they draw the bow. So that's still potential. It hasn't released the energy yet. And then the second they release the string, I'm probably calling it the wrong thing. Sorry, bow and arrowers, if that's the right word.
It's almost as bad as trampoliners.
Exactly. As soon as they release it, that turns this into kinetic energy. And then that kinetic energy is transferred to the arrow once it releases off of the string and then hits the target. So tons and tons of math involved here, and I'm not going to go into all of it, but just some numbers to think about.
I want that. Yeah.
The average bow pull weight. This is how much weight you're pulling
goodness.
with one arm. So for men in the Olympics, it's 48.5 pounds. So you're pulling almost 50 pounds with one arm horizontally and holding
totally level.
And holding it in some cases for up to 20 seconds because they get 20 seconds to take a shot. Women, it's 33 pounds. And then once they release that, the average speed at those weights is roughly 225 feet per second, or 150 miles per hour is how fast that is leaving.
Wow.
So kind of crazy. But a couple things, some other numbers to just put into your brain hole here that are just amazing to me. So the distance that they shoot at is 70 meters. That is 230 feet. So if you take your pinky nail and you stick it straight out in front of your arm at arm's length, and you look at your nail, that's how big the target looks at 70 yards. So the entire target. So
I don't know if I can even see that.
I know. Like if you just, and then there's the center of the target where, and I'm talking the whole thing is that big, not the center part. The whole thing is that big.
Oh.
So the whole target is roughly 4 feet wide, and at 70 yards, 4 feet looks like about the size of your nail at arm's length. So you can barely see the center point. You're guesstimating where it is. It's based off of muscle memory and just practice that you do this. The inner circle to hit the bullseye is only 4.8 inches. And they're doing this, they can't even see the center. It's just, again, it's muscle memory. So kind of crazy, some of the statistics for how fast these things, the engineering. The bows have all kinds of counterweights and stabilizers to help them hold it in position. So just some amazing stuff there. And this is one of those things where it's truly like that 10,000 hour issue. So if you practice for 10,000 hours, you can be a master at anything. These people have practiced way over 10,000 hours to be able to shoot at 70 meters and hit bullseyes. I watched a video of how they do this, and it's crazy the practice
is
that
that
they get into.
10,000 hours? That's the rule, basically.
Yeah, so you can master anything with 10,000 hours of practice.
I have an archery fun fact for you. Do you want it?
Shoot.
Do you know who the greatest archer of all time is?
I don't know.
Robin Hood. He's so good that he can dress up like a pelican, I think, on stilts and shoot better than the Sheriff of Nottingham. Fact.
Goodness.
Okay, moving on real quick. Like, I know we're running out of time. I have a real simple one here. It's called the long jump. Have you heard of this?
I have.
So what's the long jump? It's a measure of how long you can jump, Luke. So that's cool. Real quick, the jumper's allowed a 40-meter runway to get as much speed as possible. So that's really one of the two important things. The speed you're running and then the elevation that you get. And there's different kind of jumpers. Like two of the best ever, Jesse Owens and Carl Lewis, were both great sprinters as well. And so that really then aided them in being able to do the long jump. They used that speed to then have the distance. Others have really, really strong legs to launch and give themselves more elevation, and that's why they're able to get the distance on their jumps. But it all still comes down to then the angle that you're taking off. So optimizing your takeoff angle is what it's all about. And so studies have been done where obviously if we lived in a perfect world in a vacuum, 45 degrees from the horizontal plane is going to be your ideal launch. But that's not how it works because you have to adjust for how fast you're running, your size, everything else. They're finding, depending on if you're a sprinter that's jumping or if you're more of an elevation guy or gal, 15 to 27 degrees is really the optimum angle of launch that you're going to be shooting off from after your 40-meter run.
I'm usually like 25 and a half is what I try to shoot for whenever I do my long jumping.
That makes sense. But they actually do take your measurements and all of that. They take that into account when you're actually good at this and figure out what that angle is supposed to be. And then you just train over and over and over to hit that angle based off of your normal run speed that you're going. So not only can you not miss that angle, but when you're all like hyped up because you're in the Olympics, you still need to try and stay consistent with your running speed because you'll throw all of your numbers off otherwise.
Yeah.
Okay, do you have one you can bust through here?
Yeah, so I was gonna do Olympic triathlons, but I'm just gonna do a subset for all Olympic sports or any Olympic sport that involves speed, endurance, or physical effort.
Okay.
So this isn't like archery. This isn't anything where you're doing stationary stuff, but anything where you're active. So there's something called VO2 max.
Oh, okay.
VO2 max is the maximum oxygen uptake that your body can do per kilogram of body weight, and utilize that per minute. So when you think about like what your VO2 max is, it's a measurement of how efficiently you can utilize oxygen. So I estimated my VO2 max. There's some calculators, and my VO2 max is 43 milliliters of oxygen per kilogram per minute of my body weight. And that's actually pretty good. So for my age, it's actually considered excellent. But to put this in some comparisons here, Lance Armstrong's VO2 max.
Cheater.
Well, even without the drugs, that's the crazy part. Even without his performance-enhancing drugs, because certain people just are naturally predisposed to have a higher VO2 max capability. His VO2 max is 85. It is literally
what was yours
double.
Again?
Mine
40.
was 43.
Wow.
43. His is 85. So he can utilize double the oxygen than I can per kilogram per minute. And that's why athletes like him, no matter what, they're just going to always be a better athlete. So the average Olympic like sprinter, runner, endurance type athlete is going to be somewhere between 60 and 75. So even me thinking, oh, for my age, I'm doing great at a 43. The Olympic athlete is literally like 25 points above where I'm at. And again, that's because they're training, they're running, and you can actually build up VO2 max. You can actually improve that through, conditioning and training. But they said even if Lance Armstrong, I read this fun fact, like a trainer was talking about him. He said even if Lance Armstrong sat on his couch and ate ice cream and potato chips and did nothing else, he'd probably still be in like the 65, 70 range, just because he naturally can do that. So
I've been working on it myself. I've been working on it myself. Yeah, I'm almost up to a 12, so I'm feeling pretty good. Liking my chances for the next Summer Olympics.
Okay. So if anybody's interested, just Google VO2 max calculator, and you can see what your VO2 max is compared to mine. I'm a 43.
I think I'm going to take it to see how I match up.
Alrighty. That's all I had.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Luke. Hopefully you all enjoyed the math behind the Summer Olympics. I thought it was pretty cool. I'm really afraid of archers at the moment. That's just some creepy stuff they have going on. If you have any ideas on other topics we should be covering, just want to say hi, you want some stickers, whatever the case may be, why don't you email us at unprofessionalengineering@gmail.com. And until next time.
See ya.